Hi everyone, this is Catherine from Buffalo, New York. One of the reasons why I'm supporting Congressman Ron Paul for president in 2012 is because he wants to end corporatism. Corporatism, or crony capitalism, is not true capitalism. It is the result of corporate greed and government interference in the free market. In a true capitalist system, there is no government interference in the marketplace. There are no bailouts. Government intervention in the housing market, in addition to the Federal Reserve and our fiat currency, is what led to the housing bubble. Crony capitalism does not work. Every other candidate will only perpetuate the notion that corporations and special interests should have special privileges. Instead, we need to let the free markets work. We need to get the government out of corporations, and we need to stop the Federal Reserve from manipulating the money supply. It is corporatism, not capitalism, that's responsible for wiping out the middle class. Ron Paul is the only candidate who understands how the economy works. He predicted the financial crisis years in advance, while establishment Republicans and Democrats mocked him. Despite what the mainstream media says, we are still on the verge of a global financial crisis. Many currencies are depreciating dramatically and rapidly. It's time we got someone in the White House who truly understands economics and wants to preserve free markets.
The president, during his little 5-minute talk today, said that one of the key problems that we have is that the banks don't have capital, and we have to act aggressively to put capital back into the banks so that they can make loans. He's half right on this. The banks do need capital. But once again, the understanding of capital is very, very important. I mentioned before that capitalism isn't what we have, because capital comes from what is left over after you work hard and you use what you need to live on and you have something left over. Then you can take that and you can save it and put it in the bank or reinvest it or buy new equipment. That's capital. And we haven't worked that way for a long, long time because we quit saving a long time ago, and because the world markets were distorted by us being able to issue the reserve currency of the world. We got accustomed to calling capital what the Federal Reserve creates out of thin air. They take dollars in credit and they inject these into the banks, and then the banks make these loans and they call this capital. That is not capital. It only acts as capital because it dilutes the real value of the circulating dollar, but it didn't come from savings. So we do need it, but what we need are real savings. We don't need this continuation of deficit finance, inflating the currency and calling this capital. So it's the lack of understanding about free markets and capitalism that got us into this mess, and this idea that we can print our way out of it and the Federal Reserve out of thin air can create more capital and put it into the banks is fallacious. Besides, the key to this is something the president did mention. He was correct about that, and that is confidence, the lack of confidence. But you don't restore confidence by doing the same thing, by diluting the value of the dollar. And once again, if these attitudes don't change, they're going to continue to destroy the dollar. There are so many dollars out there right now that haven't come home to roost, and they will, and will have to suffer the consequences because we've had a free ride for so many years. We've been able to spend these dollars overseas and get goods and services without working for them. But what we need to do is restore confidence in the currency where we can go back to saving again. We shouldn't accept this idea that every time we have a crisis, especially in the last 10, 15 years, every time we had a setback, the Fed inflated more and told the consumer to borrow and spend, especially like, after 9/11 and other times when the market seemed to be floundering. They would just say that the consumer has to save the economy by spending more and running up deficits. That isn't the way you restore capital to the markets. You restore capital by getting people to work again, be confident about the currency, where they're willing to save, and we have a long way to go from there to there, and we have to do that rather soon, because if we continue to blame freedom and capitalism, we're going to end up with very difficult times. And of course, ultimately, that is the real test, whether it's dealing with our foreign policy, dealing with terrorism and 9/11, or dealing with these panicky states in the financial market. The real threat is to our liberties.
Ron, as you know, the president's going to call us all in this Thursday and give us another speech on creating jobs. What would be your jobs plan?
Well, what you need to do is repeal about 70 years of bad economic policy, which isn't all that easy because we follow Keynesian economics, and Keynesian economics teaches that you need to spend more money. No matter how much debt the people are in debt and the government's in debt, they advocate just more spending. So you have to reverse that concept. No, we have to do a lot. We have to repatriate our capital. When you have a weak currency, capital leaves our country. So we've been issuing the reserve currency of the world, so our dollars go out and buy goods and services, so our jobs go with it. So you have to change that. So it's a monetary issue. But you also have to look at the tax code. You have to, you know, everybody's talking about cutting a little bit on the capital gains. I want to get rid of the capital gains tax and get rid of the income tax, shrink the size of government. Believe me, you would have the jobs then. But of course, it's not going to be easy because half the people in this country, they sort of like receiving your money, and they're not going to go away easily. But what it's going to lead to is the destruction of our currency and the bankruptcy of the country, and that's going to be much worse than somebody withstanding a cut. But you have to change that. You have to change the regulatory code, the tax code, the monetary system, and really, I believe you have to change the foreign policy because that's a drain. All great nations fail because they spread themselves too widely around the world, and we've done it as well.
There are these buildings all across the country that look like federal buildings, that have federal seals on them, that are private. And they're alien to our country. They arrived in 1913, and since then have transferred a large portion of the country's wealth to offshore banks. Our middle class has shrunk in the last 30 years directly under the policies of this group. Now, they are not free market. They are what you call crony capitalist or monopoly capitalist. They do not like regular capitalism. Here's an example of crony capitalism. General Electric finances Obama, along with Wall Street powerhouses, 4-1, his Republican challenger. Not saying McCain was good. The point is they knew Obama was going to be the man. He gets in. General Electric, in the last 2 years, has been given waivers for their power plants. This is all on record. But every other major company isn't given waivers over the new greenhouse rules, and hundreds have been shut down or are being shut down, and power prices nationwide have gone up over 30% in just the last couple of years because more than half our energy is produced by coal. It's totally clean. All that comes out is water vapor and carbon dioxide and heat. And the government has federal monitor systems in those stacks. It goes through giant scrubber systems. But I don't want to digress here. I'm just trying to explain something. You're not going to hear Occupy Wall Street, and you're not going to hear the Tea Party, one being cast as the left, the other being cast as the right, so they can play us off against each other. Can't have populism in America. Can't ever have real issues. No, just have groups that are supposedly in their little enclaves that can then be played off against each other in divide and conquer, in balkanization. So, that is crony capitalism. We're not going to be diverted with a decoy of Wall Street and free market and capitalism. It was all insider crony capitalist garbage that did this, the opposite of free market. The big banksters are pushing all the socialism to steal your money and to collectivize you so you can't start a business and ever crawl up, so you can be a peon down in the dirt. All over the world, the globalists use people being poor and poverty to control people so they live in dirt streets. Instead of just saying capitalism is evil and all companies that have stocks and bonds on the stock market are evil, which is obviously ridiculous, we're going after the big 6 mega banks that created the 1.5 quadrillion, that control our government, that have gotten the 27+ trillion in banker bailouts.
2012. Well, let's continue our conversation here with the voters of New Hampshire. Gene Mackin of WMUR is in Hancock with a voter and a question. Gene?
Thanks very much, John, and welcome to the Hancock Inn. I'm standing here with Mike Patinsky. He is a small business owner from Harrisville, New Hampshire. And Mike, what question do you have tonight?
Well, for the candidates, I'd like to know how they plan on returning manufacturing jobs to the United States.
Congressman Paul, why don't you start with that one?
Pretty important, because everything we've done in the last 20 or 30 years, we've exported our jobs. And when you have a reserve currency of the world and you abuse it, you export money. That becomes the main export, so it goes with the money. You have to invite capital. The way you get capital into a country, you have to have a strong currency, not a weak currency. Today, it's a deliberate job of the Federal Reserve to weaken our currency. We should invite capital back. First thing is we have trillions of dollars, at least over $1 trillion of U.S. money made overseas, but it stays over there because if they bring it home, they get taxed. If you want to, we need to get the Fed to quit printing the money, and if you want capital, you have to entice those individuals to repatriate their money and take the taxes off us, set up a financial system, deregulate and de-tax, to invite people to go back to work again. But as long as we run a program of deliberately weakening our currency, our jobs will go overseas, and that is what's happened for a good many years, especially in the last decade.
The government is nothing more than a group of men who carry out the wishes of the corporate gangster bankers. Let's be clear. Okay? That's it. The people in Washington, D.C. do nothing but carry out the orders of the international corporate conglomerate. The government is not run by votes, it's run by bucks. Very important that you understand that.
What does it do when you get 120 of the most powerful people in the world getting together to have meetings with government officials? I mean, that's amazing.
Well, it is what I mean is that they're planning the corporate agenda. They're not planning the democratic human journey agenda, in my opinion. Mussolini had a definition, is when the interests of the corporation take completely over from all other interests, and that's fascism.
He said it should probably be called corporatism.
Well, call it corporatism, call it fascism, call it neo-lib, there's a whole variety of political words, depending on which side of the stripe you come from, to start with, which describes the thing. But what they are describing is the complete end of democracy, the end of what matters to people, the end of what happens to the human journey. And for that reason, I think this is revolting.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're here in Canada today to stand up against the Bilderberg Group that is attempting to get rid of the sovereignty of the United States. The truth is there's insider mega corporations that openly call it a new world order to set up a global private corporate governance system where the majority of your tax money is paid to them through contracts and bailouts and different scams. And where government merging with the big mega corporations, using that power, shuts down their competition. And it happens in beef production, poultry, farming, water treatment, electrical generation, everything.
Concerning health care, Mr. Moore believes that universal health care is everyone's right, threatens that the Democrats will lose seats if they don't support it. What's your stand on this, Congressman?
I think it's a fallacy to say that people have a right to somebody else's services. You know, you have a right to your life, and you have a right to your liberty, and you have a right to earn a living. You ought to have a right to keep it, but you have a responsibility to take care of yourselves. But you don't have a right to get something from government, because government has nothing, so government has to take it from somebody and give it to you. So it's a failed policy. It is, you know, a form of socialism, and socialism doesn't work. It leads to a big kind of problem.
Congressman, if you have no money and you fall down on the street with a heart attack, you have no money, no one should take care of you? The government should not provide an ambulance or treat you?
No, but we don't have a history in this country of that happening. Even before government started managing health care, I practiced medicine in both circumstances. In the early 60s, we didn't have managed care, and I worked in a Catholic hospital. I made $3 an hour, and nobody was ever turned away. And there were many, many church hospitals, and you had Shriner hospitals, and a lot of free care was given. Today, even with managed care, they complain about, oh, somebody doesn't have health insurance and somebody's going to die because they don't have health insurance. But really, people don't get turned away. I mean, accidents happen. Man's imperfect. But for the most part, anybody, including anybody illegal, can go to the emergency room and they always get taken care of. They just don't get thrown out in the street.
Are you saying you like the current system?
No, I probably dislike it as much as Michael Moore does. But he's complaining about it being part of capitalism. It has nothing to do with capitalism. This is corporatism. The corporations, I agree with him. Corporations run things. The drug companies lobby us. The insurance companies lobby us. And the hospital management companies lobby us. The AMA lobby us. And that's all managed care. And we have a system where money and bigness influences the government. But that's corporatism. That's not capitalism. What we want are free markets.
How do you change that?
Allow free markets to work. There's an example of free markets, and I might have even heard it on CNN today, of the example of somebody that was going to be charged $100,000 for surgery, and they went to Singapore and got it for $25,000, and the main reason they gave why they could afford to do it was that they didn't have horrendous malpractice payments to make, and there was a market. There was a market mechanism. So the patients are leaving this country. They're going to India, but that's the market working. So we have put our charity hospitals out of business. At the same time, because of inflation and management and all the mischief of government, we have pushed these prices up. Pumping money into a system doesn't improve quality. It increases prices. Look at our educational system. We pump in money, prices go up. The quality of education go up, and the quality of medicine has not gone up by just pumping more money into it.
Lyndon Johnson once said the probable answer is that a government's going to have to be half capitalistic and half socialistic. You have to have some. Social Security is socialism. You have to take care of those who don't have. Pure capitalism can't work. Would you agree with that?
No, really. It's sort of like I practice OBGYN. I never could tell my patient they had a touch of pregnancy. And, you know, you're either pregnant or you're not. You either have government intervention messing up the markets or you don't. You either believe in freedom and believe in voluntary choices. I mean, just look at this disaster with the swine flu vaccine. They took over the whole project. We pump in billions of dollars, and they come up with shortages. The distribution is lousy, and they're talking about forcing people to take them in places like New York. And nobody's even proved that it's necessary yet. We have still a lot of deaths from ordinary flu, far surpassing swine flu. So, central economic planning in anything fails, and especially in medicine it fails.
But Congressman, everyone online getting it who's getting it free is not standing there complaining about government involvement.
Yeah, but I have a daughter that practices medicine, and I was talking to her about it, and she says, "Oh yeah, Dad, I can give shots and it's for free, but we don't have anything." So when something is free and you don't have it, it's irrelevant. And some of the people who don't want it are being forced to take it. We have lost our faith and confidence in understanding how free markets work. We turned it upside down by saying anytime corporations get benefits, we call it capitalism and freedom. And it's corporatism. It's the military-industrial complex. It's all the special interests. And this is where Michael Moore gets it all wrong. He believes diligently in free markets because he believes in the First Amendment. He believes in making films. He doesn't believe in prior restraints. So why should he condemn capitalism? Right. Because he's condemning corporatism. I condemn it too. Special privileges of corporation is a big problem.
Maybe it's semantics.
I think capitalism, as it's defined now, has not only failed. Well, it hasn't really failed the rich. It's actually helped them. The wealthiest 1%. Now have more financial wealth than the bottom 95% combined. So it's a really good system for a few people.
All right, Ron, do you disagree with that statistic that Michael Moore just pointed out?
No, and I complain about it as much as he does, but I think I understand it differently because when a country embarks on deficit financing and inflationism, you wipe out the middle class, and wealth is transferred from the middle class and the poor to the rich. And when we get into trouble, then the corporations, once again, who are in control, they come for their bailout, and then they get the benefits, and the little people don't. So, yes, there is some truth to that, but it's the failure of the free market to exist. That is our problem. It isn't the fact that we don't have enough government. We have way too much government. The government created this monster. If he doesn't like what we have, he has to look at what we've been doing for 30 or 40 years. It's called interventionism. It's called Keynesianism. It's called inflationism. It's called big government. That's the problem.
John DeStaso down on the floor has a question.
Thank you, John. Congressman Paul, this is for you, but John, if you don't mind, I'd also like to hear from Governor Romney and a couple of the other candidates because it relates to a specific New Hampshire issue with the national question. Here in New Hampshire, there is a popular bill that is being considered by our state legislature that would restrict the state's power to seize private land to build a power plant or a transmission facility. Should governments at any level be able to use eminent domain for for major projects that will reduce America's dependence on foreign oil?
No, we shouldn't have that power given to the government where they can take private land and transfer it to a private industry. The eminent domain laws are going to vary in different states, but we have the national eminent domain laws. It was never meant to take it from some people, private owners, and then take it and give it to a corporation because it's going to help in that local locality. And this goes back to the basic understanding of property rights. Property in a free society should be owned by the people, and it shouldn't be regulated to death by the governments, whether it's Washington, D.C. or local governments. Right now, we really don't own our land. We just pay rent on our land, and we listen to all these regulations. So I would say the courts should get out of the way, too. They should not have this right to take land from individuals to provide privileges for another group.
This oil, and for that matter, the environment in a much larger sense, but certainly this issue of oil and our oil dependence is going to be an issue in this campaign, already is, given certainly Mr. McCain's pick of Ms. Palin out of Alaska. Give me your sense on what we ought to be doing about this oil problem that we have.
Well, get the government out of the way. The government has caused the problem because we go to war to protect our oil. And oil, at the time we went into Iraq, was $27 a barrel. Now it's well over $100 a barrel, so it doesn't really help. Government gets in the way by subsidizing corporations to make ethanol from corn. That hasn't helped. Nobody's proven that that was an economic correct decision, because it's cheaper to make ethanol from sugarcane, and we could import it cheaper than we make it from corn. But if you really want to make cheap ethanol, you make it from hemp. But that's illegal, and we get in the way. I personally think, although individuals shouldn't make the decision of what is the best source of energy, the market should. But I personally think nuclear power is safe and clean and efficient. You can have electricity, you can run electric cars, and yet we have a lot of obstacles in our way. So we put pressure on burning more coal, and we take away the incentive then to have more nuclear power.
Congressman Paul, you are a constitutional expert, and you talk a lot about the Constitution. What do you think of this argument that the state has a constitutional right to make someone buy a good or service just because they're a resident, not because they're driving and need a driver's license, but just the fact that they are a resident?
No, the way I would understand the Constitution, the federal government can't go in and prohibit the states from doing bad things. And I would consider that a very bad thing, but you don't send in a federal police force because they're doing it and throw them into court. So they do have that leeway under our Constitution. But we have big trouble in this medical care problem, and we have drifted so far from any of our care being delivered by the marketplace. And once you get the government involved, and both parties have done it, they've developed a bit of a medical care delivery system based on corporatism. The corporations are doing quite well, whether it's Obama or under the Republicans. The drug companies do well, the insurance companies do well, the organized medicine do well, the management companies do well. The patient and the doctors suffer. There's a wedge. Every time you hit the government get in here with these regulations and have these mandates, there's a wedge driven in between the doctor and the patient. We have to get the people more control of their care, and that's why these medical savings accounts could at least introduce the notion of market delivery of medical care.
The most serious mistake that could be made here today is to blame free market capitalism for this problem. This has nothing to do with free market capitalism. This has to do with a managed economy, an inflationary system, corporatism, a special interest system. It has nothing to do with the failure of free markets and capitalism. Yet we're resorting now, once again, to promoting more and more government.
And there are various ways of doing that. One is we could raise taxes on people. That's not the way. Corporations are people, my friend. We can raise taxes on. Of course they are. Everything corporations earn ultimately goes to people. So, where do you think it goes? Whose pockets? Whose pockets? People's pockets. Okay, human beings, my friend.
Real quick question for you. What did you make of Mitt Romney's statements that corporations are people yesterday?
Well, obviously, they're not. People are individuals, they're not groups, and they're not companies. Individuals have rights, and those things are, they're not collective. And you can't, duck that. So individuals should be responsible for corporation, but they shouldn't be a new creature, so to speak. So the rights and obligations should be always back to the individual.
This morning you said that the free market can regulate things far better than regulators and the government can, but using the gold industry as an example, is it just a sort of a byproduct of the free market where there are gold mines? Last year there were 400 children in Nigeria that died from lead poisoning downstream from a gold mine. Is that, and there are other, tuberculosis has been linked to it. Are those just natural byproducts of the free market system?
But I don't know the circumstances over there, but they obviously don't have property rights. The free market said you have no right to pollute a stream. So people who...
But who would protect that? Who enforces
that? Well, it's the government that has to enforce property rights. The role of the government is to enforce property rights and contracts, and so here it.
So the EPA should get involved?
No, you don't need EPA. That's just a bunch of bureaucrats serving the big industries. They protect certain industries against others. Regulations are written for the benefit of big companies. The FDA helps the drug companies. Medical care helps insurance companies. I mean, there's always.
So should we have no regulation at all and just let
by the market? By the market. If you live upstream and you dump sewer in your stream and you pollute my water, I should take you to court and make you quit.
So
I
you
should be able to get
me as an individual sue DuPont or BP.
I think you're touching on the problem. In the past, you had a collusion between the big corporations and government. I lived in Pittsburgh. Big government, big steel, and they dumped city dumped their sewers in the river, and the corporations dumped their sewer in the river. And finally, it was cleaned up, but it had nothing to do with the EPA. It had to do with local ordinances and property rights. They said you can't do it anymore. But the bureaucracy in Washington is not the most successful way to do it. We would have, if you'd have had a strict understanding of property rights during the Industrial Revolution, you wouldn't have had such a disaster. But it was the corporations and big business that worked together, and that's what you have to break up.
So do you agree with Mitt Romney that corporations are people?
You know, I don't understand that big discussion, but no, but people have rights. Corporations, they have contractual arrangements, but corporations as people, as a person has a personal right. That is not true. But if you're a person, you have rights. All rights are individuals, not by a group. And the corporation is set up as a contract. The contract then becomes important, and the government has an involvement in enforcing contracts. So it would be handled that way. But I think I don't quite understand the discussion about whether corporations are people or not. I mean, people create corporations by contract. The contract is what is important.